Welcome back, Chappelle. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of this unit that's about to get really crazy. All right, so the big thing about it, though, is we're going to try our best to keep this flip under 20 minutes, right? We're going to try to keep it under 20 minutes and discuss the effects of Napoleon and the French Revolution on an international scale, right? The big thing that you need to understand is, like, in our timeline, like where we are right now, we're now shifting gears again, right? We're now leaving Great Britain, and we're actually bebopping all the way over to South Central America and to the Caribbean, right? We're now going to actually talk about how Napoleon's actions and his invasions and the French Revolution is actually going to cause a massive amount of calamity in these two areas, effectively basically taking it from looking like this, where everything was owned by Spain and Portugal mostly, to actually looking like this, a series of independent countries that actually self-determined, right? Now, the thing that you need to understand is that some of you are like, but weren't we just talking about the Industrial Revolution? Yes, again, a thing that was going on before, during, and after Napoleon, right? And now we're going to start talking about stuff that's a direct result of Napoleon, right? And his actions in Europe, okay? And it's going to make the continent of South America and Central America, or the Americas in general, look much more diverse and look much more intense, right? And we're going to mainly be focusing on the liberation movement of this place. Oh my God, the zoom perfection right there. The liberation of Haiti, right? Which actually originally was a French colony and stuff like that, and all of Napoleon's shenanigans are going to cause a lot of calamity. Now, this right here, the background to what we're about to talk about, you do not need to write this down. You do not need to write this down. I'm just getting you caught up in where we've been this whole time, right? The thing about it is the last time in Western civilizations class that we have actually discussed the growth of South America or the actions of anything going on in South and Central America was when the Spanish were beginning to colonize this area, right? We were talking about how, like, literally in South America, the conquests of the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca, the large-scale Native American civilizations that existed there that were actually wildly sophisticated were disgustingly and violently taken over by the Spanish conquistadors, right? We talked about the effects of disease. We talked about the Columbian exchange, right? And we talked about how the colonizers were mostly Spain, Portugal, and France in these areas, right? We also briefly talked about how Britain was the colonizing area of the 13 colonies on the eastern coast of the United States as well, right? Or the now United States. And a big thing about it, though, is what's been going on since then, y'all? A lot of crazy stuff, right? Like, ever since the 1500s, look at all the things that we've talked about, right? We talked about how the Glorious Revolution inspired the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment inspired the American Revolution, and the American Revolution inspired the French Revolution, and now the French Revolution and Napoleon is about to inspire Latin American independence movements and self-determination, right? Now, Latin America, when we say that, is any of the countries that are now in the modern day Caribbean, Central America, and South America that are all actually colonized by Latin descendant-speaking people, right? As in, the French colonies and the Spanish colonies are what you would refer to as Latin America, right? Now, the one that we're going to mainly be focusing on right now, though, is we're not going to write this down. Don't worry about that. All right, so we're going to mainly be focusing on how we're going to go from looking like this to looking like this and being much more broken up, and also these Latin American countries coming to fruition. Now, I love to focus particularly on this story. This is where you need to start writing stuff down. This is the big stuff that you need to start getting, okay? The big one I like to focus on is the French colony of Saint-Domingue, right? Like, so Saint-Domingue, you know it today as modern-day Haiti, right? Now, Haiti has a very cool story about some very amazing liberators that actually liberated this area and actually took it from being a slave colony to being a free colony where slavery was abolished, right? And the people that led it were descendants of African people, right? And I think it's a very awesome story. It's super cool because it's got one of my favorite historical figures in it, Toussaint L'Ouverture, right? So now look, the big thing about it, though, is Saint-Domingue is now known as Haiti. By the way, speaking of, just so you know on a map, this right here is Cuba, that right there is Jamaica, that right there is modern-day Haiti, aka Saint-Domingue, when it was actually being colonized by the French. But as you can see really, really quickly, this little area on this side, it shares an island with someone else, right? Really, really quick, write this down. The entire island together, contiguously, is called Hispaniola, right? Hispaniola, Hispanola, right? Hispaniola had two colonies on it, right? It had Saint-Domingue right here, which is now known as Haiti, and it also had Santo Domingo, which is now known as the Dominican Republic, right? So the French owned this half, and the Spanish owned this half, right? And something that you need to understand about this particular colony, it had a very, very well-known nickname. It was called the Pearl of the Caribbean because it was one of the most money-making colonies in that entire area, right? Now, the thing about it is, though, is that literally 60% of the world's coffee was produced on that one colony, and 40% of the world's sugar was being produced on that coffee. So it made a ridiculous amount of money. Now, the thing about it, though, is it was also a disgustingly violent colony, right? Because it actually was built on a slave-based society, okay? 550,000 people. 550,000 people lived on the colony originally known as Saint-Domingue, right? Like so, and most of them spoke French, but really, really quickly, 6 out of those, 6-to-1 ratio, or 500,000 of that 550,000 people were all African descendant, former or current slaves, right? So the thing about it is, though, is that overwhelmingly the colony was inhabited by people descendant of Africans, right? Of people actually from former slaves and on up, right? So the thing that you need to understand, though, is that 1/3 of the entirety of what we call the triangle trade, I hate calling it that, but we're going to use it right now, literally passed through this area, and it was a very aggressively violent colony. Slaves led a very, very, terrible life. They were forced to work. They literally sometimes only lasted about 3 years on average, and the average life expectancy of a slave on this colony was only 21 years old, right? Mainly due to the yellow fever and also the other intense things that are going on there, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is that a lot of people that actually we know in the modern era, especially some professional sports athletes, are actually descendant of Saint-Domingue, right? This right here is Pierre Garçon. Pierre Garçon is actually a former wide receiver in the NFL. He played a lot of years with the Colts. And another famous person that is of Haitian descent is actually none other than LeBron James, right? LeBron James is actually a descendant of Haitian culture as well. Now, the thing about it, though, that you need to understand when we're talking about those big numbers, 550,000 people and 500,000 of them being slaves. So, of course, there's going to be a massive history of slave upheaval and revolt, right? So even before the French Revolution, slaves were running away from their masters at high rates and dying in revolts as well. Actually, showing up and staging violent revolts against the white people that owned the actual land or that worked in the actual area. Why is this? Because the slaves were worked practically to death every single day, right? If a slave tried to run away, they could sometimes be maimed or mutilated. And a common punishment on this island if a slave tried to run away is they would be blinded in one of their eyes, right? That is insane, right? That is ridiculous that you would treat another human being in this way. So, of course, this is going to inspire revolts. Why the French that owned these colonies thought it wouldn't is nuts to me, right? So the thing about it, though, is that slaves began running away at very high rates. They actually established very commonly these things known as maroons, which were small runaway communities, right? Little communities spread out all over the island and speckled into the mountains where they would actually create little slave cities and stuff like that, okay? So another big thing about it, though, is you got to understand there's a secondary group of people on this island, okay? They're known as the affranchis, right? The affranchis are free people of color and people of mixed race, okay? The thing about it, though, is that they tried to take control of these slave revolts to gain themselves some more rights. And they actually did end up gaining some more rights to try and suppress some of these slave revolts as well. And what that's going to do is they're going to earn some rights to vote, and they're also going to earn their own right to own slaves as well. But the problem was that this didn't actually fix anything, and it actually made more problems because it set up a social class system like this in Haiti, and it's a very fragile one at that, right? And so the big thing about it is there were the free people of color, also known as the affranchis, spelled A-F-F-R-A-N-C-H-I-E, okay? Affranchis. So literally there were only about 20,000 of them, right? And most of the free people of color were either freed slaves that had actually gone off to get educated enough to understand how to actually buy certain amounts of land, run plantations of their own, and also own slaves themselves, which is an absolutely wild setup. Or people that were manumitted by their masters and or people of mixed race, right? Because remember, we talked about this a lot when we were talking about colonization, that most of the Spanish colonists were single men, right? And there weren't very many European women there, so there was a heavy amount of mixed race people as well. At the time, called mulattoes, but I don't like to say that word, all right? So now look, so the other group of people, though, on the other side of this, as you can tell, these are African descendant people on the left, these are white descendant Europeans on the right, and the other people on this side are the Grand Blancs, right? The Grand Blancs, there's about 10,000 of them, right? But here's the screwed up part. They're the ones that own all the land in Saint-Domingue. They are the ones who own all the land in that colony, but most of them don't even live there, right? Most of them live back in France, right? They own all the land and they sign off on the violent tactics used by the Petit Blancs. The Petit Blancs were mostly white laborers, right? Artisans, craft workers, overseers on the plantation, and there's about 30,000 of them. But look at this number right here. But slaves made up 90% of the population. 500,000 people total, right? And the thing about it was is that these early slave revolts, when they weren't perfectly solved and when they actually had a history of violence going on in them, they didn't really solve anything by allowing the free people of color to vote and or to own more slaves, right? So what ends up happening is the French Revolution then explodes in 1789, right? Now, this is where everything starts going down, because what we're trying to talk about is how did the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon create calamity in their colonies and lead to major changes in the growth of Latin American countries, right? The self-determined Latin American countries. Haiti would not exist possibly the way it exists now if the French Revolution didn't happen, causing so much hysteria, right? Now, in the French Revolution, the French Revolution explodes in 1789. And what's going to happen is a large number of slaves revolt again, actually inspired by several different voodoo ceremonies that actually happened on the island itself. And there was actually a voodoo high priest that predicted the growth of this, and a hurricane actually swept in, causing massive confusion on the island, and a huge slave revolt broke out, right? The thing about it was that this particular slave revolt was aggressively successful, right? It was extremely successful, and it literally ended up taking over the entire northern province of the island, right? But a big reason why it was so successful is because a man stepped up to lead these people, who was an affranchi himself at the time, but was a former slave also. Born into slavery with a different name and things like that, and grew to actually own a plantation of his own, and also ended up becoming very educated as a young man and stuff like that, and earned his freedom later on in his life. He led this slave revolt, and he is going to be the reason why slavery gets abolished on this island. And his name was, say it with me real quick, he is awesome, he is the man. Look at him right there. He is sometimes historically known as the Black Napoleon, right? Because he was that successful in his military campaigns. But his name was Toussaint L'Ouverture, right? Toussaint L'Ouverture. Now, originally, his name was actually Toussaint Breda. Because that is actually the plantation that he was born on to African parents, right? So the thing about it, though, is Toussaint L'Ouverture is a former slave and a self-educated man. Now, not completely what we do believe happened to him, because here's the hard part, y'all. He was born a slave, so we don't know much about his early life. We actually see most of his life really get kicked off when he turned about 50 years old. And as we know already from studying some of those other historical figures, typically your biography tends to wind down in your 50s. Like, Caesar got stabbed when he was about give or take 144. What is that number? 144. Caesar got stabbed in the 60s, right? And then also looking at it as well, Napoleon had taken over all of Europe by the time he was 50, right? Well, Toussaint L'Ouverture is of course, really, really quickly, he changed his name to L'Ouverture because it means the opener of doors, right? Literally, his story gets started in his 50s because he actually, at this point, had been educated himself, and he actually had earned some medical training and actually started working in one of these slave revolts as a field doctor, right? And the thing about it was he was untrained in the military and in political matters, but he used his educated mind and the fact that he knew how to read and write to study the military campaigns of other famous generals, just like Napoleon did, and became a skilled general and diplomat, right? And he took leadership of the slave revolt that broke out in 1791 as it continued to roll forward after the man that started the voodoo ceremony had died, right? And the thing about it is he organized them together. He taught them certain skills. He made it so they weren't a group of militiamen. He turned them into a well-trained army, right? And he led 100,000 men in the slave revolt that began to really wash its way all over the entirety of the colony of Saint-Domingue. And he was so successful, in fact, that literally the other powers in the Caribbean, the Spanish government was literally like, hey, Toussaint, how about you stop being loyal to France and you become an officer in our military? And the deal will be, we will abolish slavery in your colony, but we will get the land as a part of our country, right? And Toussaint considered this very, very heavily. And to stop this from happening, the National Assembly, with Robespierre involved, comes in and says, Toussaint, do not leave France. Stay with us. We need to make money off the sugar and the coffee grown in this colony because we are in the middle of a revolution. So please leave the Spanish army, rejoin us, and we will outlaw slavery. And so Toussaint said, oui, oui. And literally, he got slavery abolished in this colony, right? They're still a part of France at this point, but the thing is he gets slavery abolished completely and actually becomes a working part of the French government, right? Toussaint Louverture led this revolt and literally accomplished so much in such a short span of his life, right? And as you can see right here in his triumphant victory portrait, he literally actually became the leader of the colony itself, regulated the production of food and goods, made it so they were actually focusing on feeding everyone and making sure also that the colony would run smoothly. But then, of course, we've got this turd who shows up. Now, everything changes when Napoleon comes onto the scene, because in January of 1802, this is literally almost 10 years into like Saint-Domingue being a slavery-free society, the French troops are going to land, in Saint-Domingue. Now, I don't know if y'all remember this or not, but I told you earlier I don't like Napoleon for two key reasons. One, he was extremely sexist and rude to women and took their rights away. And two, he tried to bring slavery back in one of his colonies. This is that colony. All right, so like this is the colony that he tried to bring slavery back into, because he was like, we'll make more money if we go back to using slavery. But this person, Toussaint Louverture, is standing in our way. That is absolutely disgusting, and it's why if Napoleon I meet him in the afterlife, I'm punching him in the face. All right, so like, look, so the French people, what's going to end up happening is like he's going to actually accuse Toussaint of setting up another uprising, right? And he sets up a meeting, and that meeting was actually a trap, right? He didn't even go himself, right? He set a trap for Toussaint Louverture and literally had him arrested and then sent him to prison in the French Alps, where Toussaint Louverture would die about 10 months later. After liberating his people, he died in April of 1803, right? The thing about it was, though, is there's a guy in the realm that I haven't talked about yet, right? There was a man, as we know, all great leaders have assistants in the wings that were there the whole time. And the name of Toussaint Louverture's second in command was a man by the name of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, right? Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who is pictured right here, who had a very different story compared to Toussaint Louverture. Jean-Jacques Dessalines was born a slave himself, but was never set free on his own right or manumitted, right? He lived on one of the most violent slave plantations that existed in Saint-Domingue. He literally witnessed the death of women and children at the hands of white overseers. He himself was tortured on the plantation that he actually worked on. So the thing about it was, Napoleon, you've gone and screwed up, because now this man is in charge and he's mad, right? Toussaint's general, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, comes into power, and in January 1st, 1804, Jean-Jacques Dessalines declares Haiti to be a new independent country, and he uses guerrilla warfare, and he has a little aid on his side as well, yellow fever, which crushes the French army, right? Guerrilla warfare tactics and the fact that disease swept through the French army and killed so many of them gave Jean-Jacques Dessalines the military upper hand that he needed, right? Now, it becomes the very first black colony to ever free itself from European control and the second colony ever to revolutionize from Europe. It went the United States of America, and then bang, Haiti was the next up, right? And he became the very first emperor of Haiti. Now, Jean-Jacques Dessalines was later assassinated, actually. He was actually stabbed to death in an assassination attempt later on in a revolt. And in 1820, Haiti became an independent republic with democratic elections, right? And most of this was done. Why did all of this happen? It's because it's a massive effect of the French Revolution, okay? So big thing, if you want to write this down, just so you know the thematics of this whole thing, why this all went down and why this all happened is because Napoleon and his campaigns and the French Revolution caused massive confusion in their colonies, giving these people the ability to actually rise up and make countries of their own, right? Same thing happened in South America as well. A man by the name of Simón Bolívar, who has a street in New Orleans named after him and a statue of himself in New Orleans, created the countries of Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and liberated themselves from the Spanish while Napoleon was invading Spain, right? Same thing happened as well, like José de San Martín in the southern area of South America, liberated Argentina and Chile, and actually liberated them away from European control and created brand new countries without European influence and without European governments, right? So the thing about it is Napoleon and his campaigns caused that much confusion that Latin American countries came into the world and became countries of their own. But that right there is where we're going to end this flip. We'll talk more about it, and we'll go a little bit deeper in our warm-up tomorrow. We'll talk a little bit more about Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and all these other characters as well, and we'll get a little bit more intense with it, okay? But I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a great rest of your evening. Talk to y'all soon.